both reigning as stealth kings, yet destined for vastly different paths.
Welcome to the Simply channel. Originally, we had a journalist sister who was supposed to discuss Taiwan-related issues with us. However, due to her unavailability today, she won't be able to join us in exploring Taiwan-related matters. Today's topic is prepared by Winston, which is about the similarities and differences between the J35 and F35. Winston, please introduce it to us. Thank you, host. Actually, the proposal of the Jingwu project, including CCTV's mention, highlights a significant difference between Jingwu and the original G20. The G20 mainly performs self-control tasks, that is, competing for self-control rights and important nodes in the opponent's airspace. The J35, on the other hand, focuses more on its multi-mission capability. We can see from CCTV reports that its multi-mission capability is evident. With the upcoming 93rd military parade, more and more photos are being exposed, revealing many details of the J35. Under the nose of the J35, there is an ETOS sensor, which is typically an integrated optical and infrared sensor. A notable difference between the J35 and the original J20 is that the J35 features a 360-degree omnidirectional ETOS. Specifically, it mainly has a forward-facing 180-degree ETOS, while its rear-facing window has a very narrow field of view. It's evident that the ETOS of the J35 is very similar to that of the F35, both featuring a 360-degree omnidirectional ETOS. This is crucial. As it is similar to that of the 20 compared to others, it has to bear the responsibility of detecting, locating, and even directly striking some important nodes of the opponent. This includes the J35 fighter jet, which was actually exposed at the Zhuhai Air Show. Actually, its built-in weapons also take into account this multi-purpose capability. Especially on our side, as you can see in the upper right corner of the picture, it is mentioned that the J35 is capable of carrying medium and long-range supersonic air-to-surface missiles. Judging from its size, this missile is mainly intended for anti-radiation missions or striking magnetic targets of the opponent. This missile does not look big or heavy, so its anti-ship capability is relatively limited. Moreover, for our country, especially during the establishment of the G20 project, the overall aviation strength between China and the United States was still in a situation where the United States was strong and China was weak. And we did not expect that the US military would encounter various problems later on, especially when the J-20 fighter jet was just undergoing test flights, and it was still a verification aircraft. The US military's M-35 it has already begun to serve. In this case, when we designed the J-20 and J-35, if we are to use them for ground attack, we mainly rely on missiles rather than aircraft to directly attack the enemy from the air. In anti-ship missions, as exposed in this recent battle, we can see that when our Air Force conducts anti-ship operations, both the Air Force and Navy's fighter jets, or multi-mission aircraft, actually have to undertake a very important task: suppressing the enemy's fire control radar and covering our anti-ship missiles for penetration. To suppress the enemy's fire control radar, there are two methods. One is a soft approach, which we often see, such as various electronic warfare platforms like the J-16, J-15, and Y-8 and Y-9 modified versions. The other is a harder approach, which involves direct destruction using anti-radiation missiles. If you launch anti-radiation missiles, there is a big question mark over whether the enemy's radar will be turned on. If the enemy's fire control radar is not turned on, it cannot guide the missiles. In this case, our anti-ship missiles have strong penetration capabilities. Even if the enemy launches electromagnetic interference, the electromagnetic interference itself is also an electromagnetic radiation source, which can easily be attacked by such anti-radiation missiles. As we all know, the J-35 will be launched on ships in the future. Because the J-35 has strong stealth capabilities, it is more effective to use stealth aircraft to launch anti-radiation missiles against battery interference. The anti-radiation mission itself requires you to emit electromagnetic waves, mainly for the function of radio positioning. In this case, stealth aircraft make it difficult for the enemy to know from which direction you are attacking, which can achieve a defenseless effect. Now, we can see the active service of our country's Navy. It mainly refers to systems like the 55 or 52D, which have large-scale mass launch systems and can launch high-speed weapons like the NG-20 to conduct long-range anti-ship attacks on the enemy. Actually, as revealed at the Zhuhai Air Show, the CM-98 missile actually has a considerable range. Due to its appearance, its range is marked as 698 kilometers. However, if you actually ask the personnel from the AVIC on site, the actual range of this missile can reach around 600 kilometers. This missile can also be integrated into the internal single-cabin area of the J35 or J20 fighter jets, as this missile is not too large. Of course, if you want a larger missile on the aircraft, you can use heavy-duty fighters like the J-15 or J-16, which are not stealthy, to carry the missile and penetrate the enemy's defenses, or to strike the enemy. In this case, to achieve higher penetration efficiency, although we now say that both the YJ-21 and CM-98 are very difficult for the enemy to intercept, it does not mean that the enemy cannot interfere. If the US military, for example, can capture your radar electronic signals very well and timely, and conduct corresponding jamming, then actually your missile hit rate will not be very good. Therefore, it is better to conduct electromagnetic suppression on the enemy before launching anti-radiation missiles, especially this kind of physical electromagnetic suppression. This is actually the safest approach. It can be seen that although the J-35 is somewhat similar to the F-35, it is mainly designed for multi-purpose use and has a very strong ability to attack the ground. However, the J-35 is more responsible for electronic reconnaissance and electronic suppression on the battlefield, as well as long-range attacks on the enemy. This is different from the F-35, which was mainly designed by the United States after the end of the Cold War in the 1990s and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The United States designed the F-35, which is called the Joint Strike Fighter, JSF. So we can see that the project it designed at that time was called JSF. Its focus is on joint strike, and the combat function is actually placed at the back. When the United States designed the M3 main battle tank, it paid more attention to its strike capability, because at that time, China's main fighter aircraft was still relatively backward aircraft like the J-8 and J-7. The radar was more than 3 generations behind that of the United States. As for the introduced aircraft, it was at least 1 generation behind the US Air Force's base radar, like the Su-27. In this situation, when the US military designed the F-35, they thought that its fighter aircraft only needed to have some bombing capabilities, meaning it was sufficient. The main purpose was to strike the enemy. Moreover, because it was invincible, when designing the F-35, the US emphasized that it could carry 2 0-pounds or 914 kilograms of bombs internally capable of striking the enemy with one shot. They did not focus on the ability of the F-35 to carry long-range land attack missiles. Therefore, even though the M35 was later designed with so-called land attack missiles, it was actually designed by a certain micro-designer, not by the US. The US actually designed various guided bombs and air-to-air missiles for the M35, including the US's concept of oil sea-to-land attack. We can see that the US military developed a relatively strong, stealthy, directional communication capability called MADL. Its Air Force, including the B-2, F-22, and F-35, directly penetrated into the enemy's air defense zone. We can see that the F-35 is leading the way and is rushing to the front. The M35 itself has a strong electronic positioning capability. So, besides its strong stealth capability, the biggest difference between the M35 and the F-20 is that the M35 has a strong electronic positioning capability. Therefore, it can bypass the enemy's radar and strike at the enemy. This is a very big characteristic of the F-35. Even after 2010, when our country's J-20 just started its test flight, the F-35 had already developed a fast engagement system. They considered that with the test flight of the J-20, it might be possible for us to resolve issues by force, and the difficulty of such operations in a certain place in Fujian would be greatly reduced. At that time, the US military still gave the 30 a chance and did not consider developing built-in anti-ship missiles. As I mentioned before, built-in anti-ship missiles would not be developed. The US considered using self-guided bombs that could directly strike moving ships. This was a test experiment conducted by the US using an F-15E equipped with such guided bombs capable of striking moving targets, targeting a cargo ship. It mainly targeted landing ships. I saw that basically one bomb could blow the ship into 2 sections. The size of this ship was similar to the most common landing ships in our country around 2010, the 72 landing ship. This kind of self-guided bomb has a combat power of 914 kilograms per bomb, which is actually much greater than most of the anti-ship missiles we see. The combat power of anti-ship missiles is generally around 300 kilograms, 200 kilograms, and 100 to 160 kilograms. Anti-ship missiles with a warhead weighing more than 500 kilograms are mostly used by shore-based forces or the rocket army. Currently, the heaviest anti-ship missiles are not more than 300 kilograms. If you use anti-ship missiles to deal with ships, you may need to use multiple missiles. However, if you use this kind of self-guided bomb, you can hit the M35's short sword missile capability with one shot. This includes the M35's ammunition magazine. Although its ammunition magazine depth is quite deep, its ammunition magazine length is very limited, because at that time, the US military designed the Mi-30, in fact, only loading is considered. His medium-range air-to-air missiles and self-guided bombs are mentioned. So, his land attack missiles are not given much consideration. As for the missile he mentioned, it was actually developed by Sweden. Sweden's military strength cannot be compared to that of the United States. Even so, the US F-35 can only internally store missiles of this type in its laboratory, and it is still undergoing testing for deployment. The system was originally planned to be completed in 2023, but in fact the project has been postponed to after 2029 for the F-35. Moreover, the anti-ship missile ZSM has a combat weight of only 110 kilograms. If it were to be used against a landing ship group, wow, this missile would actually pose little threat to a 40-ton vessel like our country's 72 class ships. As mentioned earlier, the US mainly relies on bombs to achieve a one-shot kill. Therefore, the biggest difference between the F-35 and the J-35 is that the 35 focuses primarily on its strike capability. As for the J-35, it also has a higher requirement for air combat performance than the F-35, given that our country's aircraft carriers are still far fewer than those of the US military to this day. Therefore, we can see that the J-35 compared to the F-35 adopts a twin-engine layout and has a much thinner airframe. Thus, the J-35's air-to-air interception capability in combat is actually much stronger than that of the F-35. Its speed capability is actually superior to that of the F-35. On the battlefield, compared to the F-35, it can arrive at the launch position in a timely manner, forcing the opponent to abandon the strike mission. Thank you, Winston, for your introduction. Firstly, I would like to ask about the difference in stealth performance between the J-35 and the F-35. Which one is better in terms of stealth, the J-35 or the M-35? We can't tell the difference with our naked eyes, but according to domestic research papers, the stealth performance of these two aircraft is actually at the same level. For aircraft stealth, if your stealth capability is not an order of magnitude higher than that of the opponent, the detection range won't increase significantly. To increase the detection range by a factor of 2, you need to make a difference between 1 square meter and 0.1 square meter. If there's no such difference, it may be a difference of 100 kilometers versus 120 kilometers. In this case, whether an aircraft can better achieve the launch position actually depends on its maneuverability, thrust-to-weight ratio, and maximum speed. It needs to be able to quickly reach the launch position and unleash the best performance of the air-to-air missile. We have discussed in previous live broadcasts that air-to-air missiles actually have different ranges and hit rates at different altitudes and striking speeds. According to the data I saw, the RCSS value claimed for the J-35 is 0.011 square meters. And for the F-35, the difference between them is just a doubling, which indicates what? This doubling difference actually means a significant gap in radar detection range, perhaps just a few percent or 10%. So in this case, the key is to seize the launch position. Now let's talk about the engine. How does the lifespan of the J-35 engine compare to that of the F-35? Currently, there is no authoritative information available. In 2016, the lifespan of our country's engine was only 1/3 to 1/2 of that of the American engine. With technological advancements in recent years, it can only be said that they are more or less on par. However, the engine currently used in the J-35 is derived from the Russian RV-33 engine, which evolved into the WS-21 engine. Technologically, this engine is actually one generation behind the Phone 135 engine used in the F-35 in terms of technology and structure. As for their supersonic cruise capabilities, well, that's the case. Carrier-based aircraft is a project initially proposed by the Chinese Navy. Later, the Air Force also joined the project because the Navy mainly bore the research and development costs. For carrier-based aircraft, range is actually a more important indicator than speed. Generally, for aircraft with supercruise capabilities, unless the aircraft body is very large and the fuel load is exceptionally high, the range can actually meet the standard. As for the J35, which has been exposed recently, including the airshow I attended last year, the J35 aircraft itself is not that large. It is much smaller than the J20. In this case, the J35 may have superior cruise capabilities, but its superiority is very weak. As for the F-35, he is now discussing the industrial and commercial group. As he mentioned earlier, he mainly emphasized its ground attack capability. Generally, this ground attack capability involves entering the battlefield at an altitude of less than 3 kilometers. Under such circumstances, if an aircraft wants to exceed the speed of sound, it basically needs to activate the afterburner. Even the F-24, when it wants to achieve supercruise at an altitude of 3 kilometers, actually needs to activate the afterburner. It does not have such superior capability. Therefore, the F-35 has no superior capability at all. As for the J-35, even if it has such capability, it is very weak. Compared to the F-22 and J-20, they emphasize self-control performance and mainly enter the battlefield at an altitude of 11,000 meters. In this case, both of these two aircraft actually have average supercruise capability, or rather, none at all. As for its radar, how about its anti-jamming capability? Comparatively speaking, all projects in the United States have been postponed, especially after the outbreak of the pandemic. The specific reasons for this have been introduced in detail by our guest Hui Zi before. I will upload that video when I have the chance. That is the M35. Its radar progress has fallen far behind. It is of the same generation as the J35 and uses a nitride-based frame with an active phased array radar. The APG-85 radar has now been postponed to 2029. The J35, on the other hand, clearly adopts a large aperture active phased array radar. In terms of radar materials, it is one generation more advanced than the Mi-35. Moreover, the F-35, due to various delays in its previous projects, has a radar with multifunctionality that actually lags significantly behind the J-35. Currently, the J-35 can launch anti-radiation missiles and anti-ship missiles without much difficulty. However, if the 35 wants to attack the ground, it can only drop self-guided bombs. It actually lacks the capability to use anti-radiation missiles. Therefore, in terms of radar progress, the J-35 is far ahead of the Mi-35. As for the adaptability of these two aircraft-to-aircraft carriers, the F-35, due to Lockheed's long absence from designing bombers, had a short design in terms of the axial groove. This resulted in a significant problem during construction. Finally, as we can see from this picture, the Luoma company extended the construction groove, causing a large bulge on the Mi-30's construction groove. Compared to the commercial aspect, it is much better. Similarly, the progress of the J-35 is similar to that of the Mi-35, but it does not have such a prominent bulge. Therefore, in terms of stealth, especially in the Kyiv camp, if the opponent looks down from above, the J-35 is visually much better than the F-35. As for computer adaptability, due to various reasons, it is unknown what went wrong with the American engineers in designing the Ford-class aircraft. The Ford-class actually lacks the capability to deploy the F-35. It needs further improvements. Currently, the US Navy does not like the F-35, so the US only deploys it on 3 aircraft carriers. The United States has 11 aircraft carriers. As for the J-35, it will not only be deployed in Fujian in the future, but also in Liaoning and Shandong. The earliest takeoff and landing experiment of the J-35 on an aircraft carrier was conducted on the Liaoning ship. In terms of its sortie efficiency, let's look at the reality. The F-35 aircraft originally had excellent service performance. Its maintenance time per hour of flight time was much better than that of the F-22. However, due to the price restrictions imposed by the government, Lockheed Martin had to reduce the number of spare parts provided for each F-35. Therefore, when the military purchases an aircraft, it is not just purchasing an aircraft, but actually purchasing a certain number of years of maintenance services. For any aircraft, even passenger planes, there are many hard-wearing parts. To ensure high sortie efficiency, these wear parts must have sufficient spare materials. The United States is a capitalist country anyway. When Trump strictly limited the price, Lockheed Martin reduced the number of spare parts provided for each F-35. That's why the sortie efficiency of the F-35 is very low now because of insufficient spare parts. In our country's system, such incidents like the F-35 situation do not exist. You just introduced it. The F-35 is a multinational and multi-model aircraft, and it also has a joint strike program. It seems that the J-35 doesn't have as many models. After all, our aircraft carrier is still quite new. Which of these two models is more suitable for the future battlefield? Actually, the F-35 is jointly developed by many countries, but it is actually developed by the United States because those countries can't provide much capability. Let's take a look at the participating countries of the F-35. Actually, not many of those participating countries have strong aviation capabilities except for the UK. Even so, the main demand for the F-35 is still to meet the needs of the US military. Among the countries that purchased the F-35, there are two: Japan and Israel. They didn't want the 35 at first. They wanted to buy the F-22 as they believed that the F-22 was more suitable for their national conditions. In the end, the US decided that the F-22 was too powerful, so they didn't offer it. In the end, Israel and Japan had no choice but to purchase the F-35. Actually, according to businessmen, the F-35 is mainly developed to meet the actual needs of the country itself. As for its allies, the so-called allies are actually under their combat system. Whether you call them cannon fodders or participants, they are actually more or less the same.